sisters and brothers, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
This is a proclamation of the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came to be through him, and without him nothing came to be. What came to be through him was life, and this life was the light of the human race. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. A man named John was sent from God. He came for testimony, to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to testify to the light. The true light which enlightens everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came to be through him. But the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, but his own people did not accept him. But to those who did accept him, he gave the power to become children of God. To those who believe in his name, who were born not by natural generation, nor by human choice, nor by man's decision, but God. And the Word became flesh, and made his dwelling among us. And we saw his glory, the glory as of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, saying, "This was he of whom I said, the one who was coming after me ranks ahead of me, because he existed before me. From his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace. Because while the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only Son, God, who is at the Father's side, has revealed him." My sisters and brothers, this is the good news of our salvation.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
To borrow on John Lennon's words, and so this is Christmas. The other day, I was trying to get stuff settled in my apartment. It looks like a construction stand. Things are all over the place, and I'm still, trying to figure out what I need and what I don't need. Brother Richard and Brother and Father Joe were up the other day. In all this, the bed broke, and so I'm sleeping in a chair, and I'm thinking, I just don't know what to do. Anyway, but I figured, well, let me start at least going through stuff. So I was going through stuff, and I was doing very well, and I had the TV on, and the show, The Mystery in the Museum, was on. Terrible. Because I got so hooked on what they were saying, because they were talking about fairy tales. In my background, I studied literature of a variety of genre, English, Italian, Spanish, world history, whatever. And we studied a variety of literary components that were unique to the circumstance. And as the guy was talking about fairy tales were very unique, and they still are. They're means by which a parent transmits a truth to the child in story form. If you look at all the fairy tales that we've had, you see that there's a protagonist, a wicked queen, a witch trying to get you to eat a poison apple, the witch who's going to throw you in the oven in her candy house, or whatever it might be. But you see that there is a confrontation with evil, and that justice prevails, and at the end, everybody lives happily ever after. But if you take the original Grimm fairy tales, everybody doesn't live happily ever after. In the story of Cinderella, we know that Cinderella is given by her fairy godmother these glass slippers. And she goes to the ball, she marvels everybody by her beauty and all this stuff. And at 12 o'clock, she's running out, and one of the slippers falls. And you know the rest of the story. The prince, who's infatuated with her, goes and throughout his kingdom, trying to find the one who fits this shoe. And he comes to Cinderella's house, and the two ugly sisters and the stepmother are trying to get their feet into this shoe, and it just doesn't work. And then Cinderella is found in an attic, being hidden away because they knew that the slipper was hers. And the prince demanded to see her. She comes down, and you know the rest of the story. They lived happily ever after, except for the two stepsisters and the stepmother, who were arrested. Iron shoes were made and heated in the fire. And then they were put on the feet of these individuals, and they danced until they died. Now, we don't have that because that could create a little bit of a nightmarish tone to, but be that as it may, fairy tales are things that we always use as means of education and entertainment. Last night we read in the Gospels a story from Luke about the birth of Christ, and probably this is one of those stories that everyone knows. Everyone knows. Once upon a time, there was a couple, Mary and Joseph, and Mary was with child, and they had to go to Bethlehem, and no room in the inn. They wind up sleeping in a stable. Baby is born, angels come, shepherds come, and everybody lives happily ever after. But we do know the rest of the story, and that's not true. That's not true. But that's the fairy tale for today. That's the fairy tale for today. It helps us to ground us in that reality. We understand a couple pregnant, no room. We understand that. It makes sense. It makes sense. On the other hand, this morning we heard another story, another fable, another fairy tale. And it comes from the Gospel of John, the beginning of John. And if you would read this without faith, you'd say, this man is probably smoking something that I would like to take a bag home with, because of the fact it just doesn't make sense. He's going using words all over the place, God and this and Jesus, but the Word was made flesh. And does that make sense? Well, it does make sense, because the fairy tale is our tale. The fairy tale has us involved in it. And when we see this beautiful fairy tale that does not take place in time, it takes place outside of time and space, which is very difficult for understanding, because we ground ourselves with time and space. That's where we are. That's how we deal with life. There was yesterday, today, and tomorrow. That's time. But God operates outside of time. Operates outside of this thing that we call our reality. And in God's reality, the Word was with God. The eternal Word was with God. Now, in doing some research, I found that one author said that the Greek word for when they say, and the Word was with God, there is a Greek word which could be translated, and the Word faced God. Now, when you look at that, and not to get too theological today, but you have God and the Word looking out, not looking at each other. But if you take that verb and say it means looking at one another, there becomes a greater dynamism, a greater relationship, because they're viewing, God and the Word are viewing one another. And C. Baxter Kruger would say this is the beginning of the great dance. That when you dance, you face one another. You don't face out unless you're doing Irish step dancing. But if you turn and any kind of dance that we have, we face one another. And that is the relationship. That is the relationship that God had with the Word. They faced one another. They were in an eternal relationship that far goes beyond anything we can understand. And yet this is the Word that came in silence. We talk about the great bang, and that God created and bang, the great bang. But I would say to you, my brothers and sisters, it's the great silence. Because no word was spoken except the Word. And it was spoken in silence. And God created that Word, and that Word became flesh. Not by trumpets and all the rest, but a feeling of comfort and peace that must have come over Mary at that moment when she conceived the Word in her womb. A sense of warmth, of relationship with God, and now the relationship with the physical God made man. And so today, Christmas is a day for children, but it's also a day for us adults to move beyond that beautiful story of Mary and Joseph, the donkey and the cow and the sheep and the shepherd and the candy cane and whatever else we have, and to move beyond that and say, before this happened, in God's time, there was a more wonderful fairy tale being told. In the beginning, the Word was facing God, and the Word was God. And that Word became flesh. And we don't know the end of the story as we do here. But please God, the end of the story will go. And they lived happily ever after. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.